Back when I was in my 20s, I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything special, just a cheap, one-bedroom place that fit my budget. The only downside was that my bedroom window faced the parking lot, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. The first week passed without anything strange happening. I worked late shifts, came home exhausted, and barely spent time looking outside. But then, one night, I noticed something odd. It was past midnight, and I had just turned off my bedroom light when I got that weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I rolled over and glanced at the window. That's when I saw him. A man, standing beneath the streetlight at the edge of the lot. He wasn't walking, wasn't waiting for a ride, just standing there, facing my window. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just lost or waiting for someone. But he didn't check his phone. He didn't look around. He just stood there. I stared for a while, expecting him to move. When he didn't, I grabbed my phone and took a picture. But when I looked at the screen, all I could see was my own reflection in the glass. And when I looked back up, he was gone. I barely slept that night. The next evening, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it, or maybe it was just a random passerby. But the moment I turned off the lights, that feeling returned. And when I looked out the window, there he was again. Same spot, same stillness. This time, I didn't just watch. I stood up, walked to the window, and yanked the curtains open. But he didn't react. I couldn't see his face, just the dark shape of his body. I turned on the bedroom light, grabbed my phone, and stepped closer to the glass. The second I did, he moved. Not away, toward me. My heart pounded as he took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel him staring. I ran to the front door, threw it open, and stepped outside. But the parking lot was empty. Just silence. For the next week, he kept coming back. Every night, at the same time, standing in the exact same spot, watching. I told my landlord. He shrugged it off. I called the police. They sent a patrol car, but of course, the man never showed up. Then, one night, everything changed. I had just finished brushing my teeth when I felt it again, that heavy presence in the air. I stepped into my bedroom and froze. The curtains were open. I never left them open. And there, pressed against the glass, was the man. Not in the parking lot, not under the streetlight, right up against my window. His face was barely visible in the darkness, but I could see his breath fogging up the glass. His hands hung limply at his sides, fingers twitching. I couldn't move. For what felt like an eternity, we just stood there. Me in my room, him outside, separated by only a thin sheet of glass. Then, his lips moved. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see the words forming, whispering. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and in that instant, I saw him clearly. His face was pale, stretched too tight over sharp bones. His eyes were wide, hollow, unblinking. And then, he was gone. Not like he ran. Not like he ducked out of sight. 1 second he was there. The next, he wasn't. That was the last time I saw him. I moved out a week later. Never told my landlord why. Never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, when I turn off the lights, I still feel it. Like someone's standing just outside. Last summer, I moved into a small rental home on the edge of town. It wasn't anything special, just a one-bedroom place with an old wooden porch and a backyard that stretched into the trees. The price was cheap, and I liked the idea of being away from the city noise. The first few days were normal. I spent most of my time unpacking and settling in. But then, on the third night, I noticed something strange. It was nearly midnight when I went to lock the front door before heading to bed. That's when I saw him. A man, standing on the dirt road in front of my house. He wasn't walking or moving, just standing completely still, facing my house. At first I thought maybe he was a neighbor, but something felt off. He was too far away for me to make out his face, but the way he stood there, unmoving, made my skin crawl. I closed the curtain and locked the door. Maybe he was just passing by. Maybe he wasn't looking at my house at all. I went to bed, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the window. Finally, I drifted off to sleep. The next night, he was there again. Same spot, same stance. This time, I watched him for longer. He didn't move a muscle. No shifting of weight, no tilting of his head. Just stillness. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? There's a man standing on the road. That wasn't exactly a crime, so I tried to ignore it. But then, the third night came. I told myself I wouldn't look. I'd lock the door, close the curtains, and go to bed. But as I passed the window, curiosity got the best of me. I lifted the edge of the curtain and peeked outside. He was closer, not on the road anymore. Now, he was standing at the edge of my front yard. That was enough for me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the dispatcher, I kept my eyes on him, my heart pounding. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man outside my house, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He's been standing there for 3 nights in a row. Now he's closer. The dispatcher asked me the usual questions, description, location, if he had any weapons. But when she asked if he had made any threats, I hesitated. No, I admitted, but he doesn't leave. He just watches. We'll send someone over to check it out. I stayed by the window, watching him. I was afraid that if I looked away, he'd move again. The minutes dragged on, and finally, I saw a pair of headlights coming down the road. A police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. The man didn't move. The officer stepped out, shining his flashlight toward the figure. I expected him to react, to run, to say something. But he didn't. He just stood there. The officer called out to him, but there was no response. Slowly, he walked toward the man, keeping one hand on his holster. Then, he stopped. From my window, I saw his shoulders tense. He lifted his radio and said something into it. A few seconds later, he turned back to me. His expression was unreadable as he approached my porch. I opened the door just enough to hear him. "Sir," he said carefully, "are you sure you saw this man tonight?" I frowned. "What do you mean? He's right there." The officer shook his head. "No, he's not." I leaned past him to look. The man was gone. But here's the thing. There were no footprints in the dirt where he had been standing. No sign that anyone had ever been there at all. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked the road, the yard, even the woods behind my house. There was nothing. No clues, no tracks. I never saw the man again. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me through the window. Moving out of my tiny apartment was supposed to be a fresh start. I had just landed a better-paying job, and my friend Jake and I decided to rent a small house together to save money. It wasn't anything fancy, just a single-story home on the edge of town, but it was affordable and gave us more space than any apartment could. The first few days were spent unpacking, assembling furniture, and figuring out which takeout places delivered the fastest. Everything seemed normal, until we found the note. It was a plain white card, tucked under our front door. No envelope, no signature, just 5 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Don't let her see you." At first, we laughed it off. Probably a prank from the previous tenants or some neighborhood kid messing around. We tossed it in the trash and forgot about it. That night, I woke up thirsty. As I passed the living room on my way to the kitchen, I saw movement through the window. A figure stood just beyond the porch light's glow. A woman. She wasn't moving, just standing there, barely visible in the darkness. Her head was tilted slightly, as if she were trying to listen. I froze, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. After a few moments, I took a slow step toward the window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the second I moved, she vanished. One moment she was there. The next, she wasn't. I told Jake about it in the morning, but he just shrugged. Creepy, yeah, but probably some weirdo passing through. It's a quiet neighborhood, but that doesn't mean it's empty. Maybe he was right. But then it happened again. And again. Every few nights, I'd catch glimpses of her outside, always standing near the house, always staring. But the moment I moved or blinked, she would disappear. One night, I stayed up, determined to catch her. I turned off all the lights and waited in the living room, watching the window. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I heard it. A single, deliberate knock on the front door. I held my breath. Another knock. Slow. Steady. I didn't move. The doorknob rattled. Something inside me screamed, "Do not look." The rattling stopped. Silence pressed down on the room. I sat there, frozen, until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. Jake thought I was losing it until he saw her too. He had been out late one night, coming home from work, when he texted me from the driveway. "She's here!" I ran to the window, but all I saw was Jake sitting in his car, pale as a ghost, gripping the steering wheel. When he finally stepped out and rushed inside, he barely spoke. He only said one thing before locking every door and window. She was standing at the passenger side door, staring at me through the glass. And when I turned my head for even a second, she was gone. That was the final straw. The next morning, we started packing. Whatever was happening, we weren't going to stick around to find out. But the house wasn't ready to let us go. Our final night there, Jake left to grab some boxes from his car while I finished packing in my bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open and his footsteps coming down the hall. Except, something felt off. His footsteps were too slow, too deliberate. I turned toward the doorway just as he stepped into the room. It was Jake, but his face was wrong. His eyes were wide, unblinking. His mouth was slightly open, like he was trying to say something but couldn't. "Jake?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I took a step forward. And then I heard it. From outside, a frantic pounding on the window. I spun toward the sound and saw Jake standing outside, his face twisted in panic. "Don't move!" he shouted through the glass. "That's not me!" My stomach turned ice cold. I whipped around. But the thing that had been standing in my doorway was already gone. We left everything behind that night. And as we drove away from that house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us, waiting for someone else to move in.